It's time for another realignment update from the Big Mountain.
Conference realignment is always in the news, so we're back on the Big Mountain to break it down for you.
Hey, welcome back to the Big Mountain. It is spring, and there is a lot of news going on right now, and I believe Steve has some hot takes regarding the Big Ten, Notre Dame, and some other schools. Steve, I'm anxious to hear what you have to say because I don't know a whole lot right now.
Yeah, we've had some people asking us for some updates, and we don't always have an update.
Right.
So it's just we got to wait until we get updates because that's just kind of how things work. So I reached out to one of my contacts Friday, and then was able to confirm some stuff on Monday.
Okay.
So I thought we would do this episode and just update. This is kind of going to be kind of a broad spectrum update. Some FSU stuff, some ACC stuff, Big Ten,
okay,
maybe even sprinkle SEC, Notre Dame, maybe some other conferences in there. So
okay, now is this your source from the Big Ten, or is this another source?
So my main source from the Big Ten,
okay,
and then another source that I'll just say we'll say is close to a Big Ten president.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
All right.
So
there you go. We like to be clear on this.
Yeah.
I also want to say that we don't put out realignment episodes just to get clicks. We do this when, as Steve said, when we have new information. Thus, having new information means you're going to get an update from us. I know a few weeks ago there were some people asking us for items. I said I'm not aware of really anything. I mean, there's the rumor mill, but nothing from one of our sources. But that apparently has changed, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Yep. So, well, first of all, I want to dig right into Florida State. Okay.
Yes.
And from both of my contacts, it's very clear that Florida State remains the main target of the Big Ten. I was able to confirm again from both of these separate sources, that there are talks happening in the background. The next phase of the Big Ten's expansion strategy really relies and focuses on Florida State. They are the main target there. It's 95% of the next phase is dependent on Florida State.
Okay.
And there are talks happening since the settlement has been reached verbally or whatever, unofficially. Talks have been happening, but I was cautioned that not all T's have been crossed and I's have been dotted on those settlements. So there's not going to be any kind of movement or anything official, anything in official channels until those settlements are signed, sealed, and delivered, and accepted by judges and all that kind of stuff in all the different states.
Right. Okay.
But again, Florida State, the main target of Big Ten expansion,
which is what you have said again from the very beginning. Yes. Not a surprise to us. People have wavered on that. Some have joined that bandwagon. Some have left that bandwagon. You've been very clear from the beginning. I do have a quick question, and the answer may be no, not at all.
Yeah.
But, there's some smoke out there. There's some rumors out there that this whole settlement has left a bad taste in presidents' mouths with the Big Ten. And I'm going to talk about the Big Ten only because that's where your sources are. Has that come up at all where they're like, wow, yeah, we don't want this bad partner. It's a bad taste. It's a bad look. It's a fill in the blank. Have you heard that at all?
Not at all.
Okay.
I think the only hesitation on the Big Ten's part, which is something we've talked about many times, is the timeline. The Big Ten in general would like to wait till closer to 2030, and there's been a lot of public stuff out of the Florida State realm that they want to go as soon as possible.
Right.
So nothing at all. They are still focused on Florida State being the next member of the Big Ten. They feel like they fit their profile. And I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but they love the work they've been doing on their research side, and just expanding to be more of that flagship public university. And we all know, as soon as I call Florida State the flagship public university, people say, well, University of Florida.
Right.
Well, Florida's so big, they have two flagship public universities. And so the Big Ten, the presidents, everything, they love what Florida State is doing in that regards.
Okay.
And I think the viewpoint as far as the lawsuits and all that stuff was, this was something that was eventually going to happen. Breakups are messy.
Sure.
Now that it's over and everyone's kind of happy, okay, now it's time for the adults to kind of get to work on the next phase.
Okay. Very good.
So the really big interesting thing that came up on Friday,
and
I wanted to just kind of get a second confirmation today on it,
was
for the first time ever from either of my sources, I heard the name Clemson. Okay. I've asked about Clemson over and over, and I was told in the past that Clemson just was not brought up, that they were not a target of the Big Ten. So what I found out on Friday, and I wanted to confirm on Monday, was apparently the Big Ten, the league office, has been floating Clemson to current Big Ten schools. Back in December and January, after the regular season was over, we did that episode about the Big Ten being worried about their TV numbers and not having a lot of big games. Tony Petitti, the commissioner of the Big Ten, began to float Clemson as an additional partner, but only to the presidents at that time, kind of the high level, like, hey, we have a problem here. I think Clemson is a way we fix it. At that time, I was not hearing anything about that. So that has basically started to get out a little bit more within the Big Ten, and now ADs are talking about it in the Big Ten. How would that work? You know, the travel stuff, you know, how do they incorporate with the sports that they sponsor, all of those things. So at first it was kind of circulated among and they do these little test balloons, trial balloons, to see if anybody's going to really pitch a fit or whatever. And first it was with the presidents, and now it's at the AD level. And that's a big difference, I will say, between Tony Petitti, how he works, and Kevin Warren, the last commissioner. He just made these deals and told everybody to live with it. Now Tony Petitti, he's making his arguments on the front end, first to the presidents, and now they're kind of sorting things down the ADs. Like, oh, so if we did invite them, how would this work? You know, with the sports they sponsor, with scheduling and all that, to kind of get the ADs on board and be part of the process on the front end, which I think is probably a good move. So that was, and to me, that was very significant, because before I was always told Clemson, no, they're not being talked about. It wasn't a no, it was just that they were not being talked about. So now it's huge. And here's the reason why. From what I understand, Fox is pushing the Big Ten for FSU and Clemson together. They are, so the way the TV deal works is basically Fox is their main partner, and then the CBS and NBC get little package deals. Well, Fox is getting a lot of pressure from CBS and NBC. Basically, hey, you guys are taking all the awesome games. We have, you know, not as many good games to cover. We need more quality. We did that episode about that 4 million viewer. They want more of those 4 million viewer games. So Fox is basically pushing the Big Ten to go out and grab FSU and Clemson. We know what happened when Fox wanted to get into the LA market before. They went and grabbed UCLA, USC, and UCLA. So. And basically, you know, Tony Petitti, again, this guy is a TV executive that is now running the Big Ten. So he is very much into numbers. He's showing those numbers ever since December and January. He's been showing all the power players and decision makers in the Big Ten the TV numbers. And really, when you look at football TV eyeballs, you know, Clemson and FSU, they are the big players in the ACC. Now, we did see Miami had some good numbers and Georgia Tech had some good numbers, but really the heavy hitters are Clemson and Florida State. And so this is really coming, the new pressure right now is coming from Fox. However, there are some other media partners that are also part of this.
When you say pressure, is that pressure in the interim, or do you think that's pressure for the new deal? Do you have any again, I hate talking timelines, but do you have any... Was there anything that kind of said, hey, sooner rather than later type of deal? I mean, we all know, and I think you're going to get to the NBC issues. And so if you want to wait on this question, please do.
No, I can answer it. So I think it's a little bit of both. Again, I think, so the Big Ten, they would rather be in the position they were in last time, where they get to the end of their deal, they make some additions, and then they can go out and sell to the highest bidders. But I think there is some motivation. I don't even know if pressure is the right word I should use, but basically, I think Fox is basically telling them, hey, if you go ahead and add them now, it would be good for all of us, because we can add some money to the deal. We can make NBC happy. You know, everyone is going to benefit. So, so that's how I would classify that. Is definitely Fox is interested in adding FSU and Clemson. The league office would probably want to wait until closer to the new deal being negotiated, because they feel like that puts them in the best position to negotiate a new deal. However, it sounds like Fox would be willing to maybe pony up some cash. If they're pushing this, you would think they'd be willing to pony up some cash. So that, I mean, and that's a big change really since the settlement is. Now actually actively talking about it in official channels and official ways.
Well, and you mentioned, I just want to point out, you mentioned where the conversation was at the very top level, the president level, and was not filtering down. And, you know, and it's different at every university. I've said this on a recent pod that, some ADs are more involved in that. Maybe the presidents get them involved a lot sooner than other presidents and other ADs. And this isn't a knock on the athletic directors. We've had plenty on. I enjoy talking to them. But as you pointed out, when this begins, and again, every conference is different and every commissioner is different. But it starts at least here potentially starts at the very highest level. The presidents, they're very tight-lipped. They're not letting anything, any cats out of the bag, if you will. So this Clemson piece that you're now hearing may have actually been going on for a little while, but it was just kept at the very, very top need to know type of people. And now that it's like, okay, there's a settlement. There's, potentially Fox is interested. So now we're going to dig down a little bit further and be like, okay, not only is there interest, now is it feasible?
Yes.
Why is it or why isn't it feasible?
How would it work?
How would it work?
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yes, and that is exactly what stage we're at this point.
Okay.
Now, here's an interesting tidbit, though. So Fox is putting this, pressure or momentum towards getting these two. Big Ten, they were kind of hesitant at the league office level.
Right.
But what's actually slowing things up right now, from what I understand, is Florida State and Clemson actually want to find out if they have any SEC offers.
Okay.
And the Big Ten is willing to kind of sit back and wait and let the SEC go first.
Okay.
Because of the nature. So the Big Ten does not want to be in a battle with the SEC. Mm-hmm. They want to cooperate with the SEC. They want a scheduling agreement and all that stuff. So Florida State, Clemson, they want to kind of slow things down, which I know there's going to be some Florida State fans because I interact with them on Twitter, and they're like, we're going now. Nothing makes sense unless we go now. They want to go right away.
Sure.
But the decision makers within the Big Ten, within the SEC, and at the highest levels of Florida State and Clemson are actually kind of putting the brakes on things. And again, from the FSU and Clemson perspective, they want to know, are they going to get an SEC offer?
Okay.
Now, I think we're going to talk about some other SEC stuff a little bit later.
Okay.
So I'm not going to get too further into that.
Yep.
Other than just I want to let everybody know part of the slowdown right now, because if it was just up to Fox, Big Ten would be inviting Florida State and Clemson tomorrow, or as soon as the ink is sealed on those settlements.
Okay.
But Florida State and Clemson decision makers are actually kind of putting the brakes on and saying, oh yes, we are interested in the Big Ten. They're participating in these kind of like back channel talks, unofficial talks, but they also want to find out if they're going to have an SEC offer. Because if you can have the two highest, richest conferences in the country bidding for your services,
right,
that's a good position to be in.
Yep. Agree.
Now, another thing that I thought was interesting. So we talk about AAU stuff,
yes,
and I've made a big deal about there's not been a member of the Big Ten that was invited without AAU status when they were invited since Michigan State in I think the 50s. And so we've talked about Florida State and how they are increasing their research, and they're on track, and I believe they're on track for AAU status. Now, I brought this up, and again, we try and stay out of politics as much as we can on our show, but I just want to throw this in here that, again, the Big Ten presidents are very happy with Florida State and their research efforts. They feel like they're on the glide path for AAU, but they are kind of willing to put their standards on pause for a little bit with that stuff because of the uncertainty right now with all the government funding issues of research. Mm-hmm. Some of the Big Ten schools may be losing, government funding for research.
Right.
So that criteria, basically, they're kind of giving programs maybe a little bit of a pass on that, mostly because of the current situation. Their understanding of the government funding issues with research. So that's really all I want to say about that.
I have two things for that.
All right.
Number one, I'll tell you what, AAU, there's some people out there that are very adamant about this issue.
Yes.
And I'm not going to get into it, but they are very adamant about this issue with the Big Ten.
Yes.
The other thing I want to point out is Clemson. The last time we talked, you had mentioned you weren't sure about Clemson, whether they were or weren't kind of going for AAU. They are. I know we had a couple commenters talk about that. There's actually, I believe, I don't have it written down. I don't remember the name, but there's I don't know, Tiger Research or something. I don't know, it's not what it is. Somebody will correct me in the comments. Yeah. But they as well are. I don't know if they're equally as aggressive as what FSU is trying to be at. But Clemson is interested, and they do have an arm that's focused on trying to get AAU as well. So I want to give that shout out to Tigers fans. I know they Little people got a couple comments last time about that. So give them a shout out.
And the thing about it is, the thing to understand with AAU is the two parts. The Big Ten is the largest voting block in the AAU.
Right.
There is not a written down criteria. I know everybody says this is the criteria. Those are unofficial criteria.
Yep.
And they do want you to meet those criteria. However, it's a invitation exclusive club.
Right.
And the biggest voting members are the Big Ten schools. If they want you in the club, you're going to be in the club.
Yep.
The second thing is, the reason they want AAU members is not just because they have a special pass that says I'm an AAU member they carry around in their wallet. It's because they want them to join the Big Ten Research Consortium,
yes,
which is their own consortium. And yes, and Florida State, I think they would love to have them in there, and Clemson is doing a lot of good things as well.
Yep.
And from what I understand, and that will always be a big thing for the Big Ten presidents. But in the current nature of the business of college football, and what's going on with government funding and research right now, the calculus on that has changed a little bit.
All right. Makes sense.
Okay, so the next thing I want to get to, let's talk about NBC.
Yeah, you said that they're a little unhappy, and I want to hear what you have to say, because I have a question about how Fox and NBC, how their relationship is here with the Big Ten. But you go ahead, and then I got a follow-up for you.
So here's a really tricky part. So NBC, they're unhappy with their Big Ten games.
Okay.
They have not been getting what they thought they would be getting for the Big Ten games. But they also have the Notre Dame plan. And they're not so happy with Notre Dame, some of their numbers with their ACC partners.
Okay.
So NBC, they want more big games for both Big Ten Saturday night, but they also want bigger, Notre Dame playing bigger games against those top ACC programs. So I think, we've seen reporting that the ACC is going to have some of those top teams, the Miami, the Florida State, the Clemson, all those play Notre Dame more.
Yes.
Now, Fox and the Big Ten are trying to make NBC happy by bringing in better teams, but the problem is it's kind of robbing Paul to pay Peter. Is that the robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Right.
So that goes into it as well. Like, that's not alone is not going to make NBC happier, because it's then decreasing the value of their Notre Dame contract.
Right.
So that is a tricky row to hoe. Okay. It's going to be tricky there with NBC, and NBC continues to not be happy with their Big Ten game selection. So I want to throw that out there. And so then that leads me to Notre Dame.
Yes.
Okay. So everyone always says Notre Dame, they've got to join a conference. They better join a conference, blah, 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 blah. I get it. Well, Notre Dame has told both the Big Ten and the SEC, because both of them reached out after this ACC settlement, from what I understand, that they have they continue to have zero interest in joining a conference.
Okay.
Unless and until there is a super league that would be made up of, like, let's say the Big Ten, the SEC, plus Notre Dame and some other schools.
Others, right.
But they have no interest whatsoever in joining a conference for football. They love their the situation they're in. They want to continue to play Big Ten teams and ACC teams, and maybe add some SEC teams to the regular schedule. To them, it's very important to be independent football. They want to continue to play USC every year. There's been some speculation that maybe the Big Ten wouldn't let the USC play them.
Okay.
But I think, and we'll see how the SEC scheduling agreement goes, but that's such a big game, and for all the ratings partners, for NBC, for everybody, I think we'll continue to see that. They want to play Stanford every year.
Okay.
They have also let the SEC, Big Ten, and the teams who are still in the ACC know their number one priority is to protect the ACC, or even rebuild it with schools that are like-minded if the big programs leave.
Wow.
So they are 100% invested in staying affiliated with the ACC and all those other sports, and maintaining a relationship, a scheduling agreement in football, but having their independence. Now, which leads us to Miami. We've talked about Miami. I confirmed again. So Miami is pretty far down the list from Florida State. Florida State is that number one priority.
Okay.
If the SEC were to gobble up Florida State, the backup plan for the Big Ten, Miami is in there. Okay. Miami is a part of the backup plan.
Okay.
It's not going to fill the whole pie.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But it is part of the backup plan. However, recently, since the settlement, Miami has been hearing from Notre Dame. Notre Dame is lobbying Miami hard to stay in the ACC unless they can get an invite from either the Big Ten or the SEC. But even so, they want them to stay in the ACC and be part of those like-minded elite private universities that kind of build a backbone of the ACC. So even if we have some of the big public schools leave,
Right.
Notre Dame is lobbying Miami to stay and basically kind of be a part of like them and Stanford and those elite private universities.
So it sounds like Notre Dame's trying to, like you say, protect the ACC,
Yes.
minimize the losses.
Yep.
We both think that 3 are going to be gone here in the next few years, or whatever the case may be. And FSU, as you mentioned, Clemson, as you mentioned before, and I think we're going to get to maybe UNC here in a little bit. Those being the top 3 that are likely to be out. But if they can keep Miami and they can help with the rebuild, even though they're not a member of the ACC, they certainly bring a lot of eyeballs
Yes.
to the ACC games, who they're playing football with for the most part because of the scheduling agreement. You said a lot of stuff there. I want to go back and ask you about this Fox and NBC. Why does Fox, and I don't know enough about the Big Ten agreements, why does Fox care that NBC's upset?
So this is why.
Okay.
So it's kind of a dirty little secret for how the Big Ten's. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, with Bob Thompson.
Okay, yeah.
So what happened? So the Big Ten network actually owns the rights to the Big Ten to their games.
Okay.
And the Big Ten network is 51% of the ownership of that is Fox.
Okay.
Okay. And so they basically they're partners with the Big Ten, like literal partners,
Sure,
not
right.
how we talk about media partners.
No.
They're
But
literal
ownership.
ownership, part owners.
Yes,
Yes,
okay.
basically of the rights to the Big Ten games, and so they're in the room when they're negotiating and selling that package. It's the Big Ten commissioner and it's a Fox executive
Gotcha.
negotiating with NBC and CBS to buy off little pieces of the package that really Big Ten or Fox already owns 51% of.
Gotcha. Thank you. We have talked about that before. My little brain forgot that. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I do recall that now.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, why the heck does Fox care? And that's exactly why.
Yes.
Which is probably, that's the only arrangement like that in
I know of,
college football,
Right.
right? Like, so it's unique that Fox has an ownership stake, if you will, in the all of the rights of the Big Ten and of the game. So they want to make. It's kind of weird because they're enemies, if you will, usually competitors. Yeah. Thank you, not enemies. Competitors is a much more professional way to say that. But if Fox is trying to sell some of the items that they own, they want to keep that partner happy too. So that's why. Okay, thank you for connecting those dots. I had totally forgotten that. And then Notre Dame. Yeah, I mean it's interesting here that you say. That they're maybe trying to protect, again, maybe a strong word, but help reconcile outside of a few schools the ACC for them to maintain their relevance as a P4 conference. And I think that's huge. I mean, we had not heard that before. There's been a lot of people saying that, oh, wow, when these 3, 4, 5, 6 schools jump, NBC or Notre Dame's not going to want anything to do with the rest of them. But what you're saying is Notre Dame actually is taking an active role in potentially keeping universities, and then also interested in the rebuild of backfilling a few
with their friends,
with their friends,
pick,
right?
Yes.
With their friends, and just remember, I mean, a lot of people look at this, and I don't know what the ACC would do, right? But they're up 3 right now from where they were a few years ago, right? They added SMU, they added Stanford, and they added Cal. And if they lose a few, they're net neutral to where they were just a few years ago. I'm not saying they'd be happy with that.
Right.
They might want to backfill those new losses, but we don't know exactly what they want to do. And Notre Dame clearly is interested maybe in some other schools. So
yes, and the way it was described to me is as soon as the settlement was made public, the vultures started circling the Big Ten and the SEC, and the way it was described to me, Notre Dame has been stepping in and swinging a big stick. At the vultures, trying to either keep the ACC together as it is now, or if not, kind of rebuild it and constitute it as like they're the big daddy, and this is their conference that they've made for themselves, kind of thing.
Very interesting. I have not heard that. Certainly makes sense, and protect, clearly, if that's the case, literally batting the vultures away.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing right now. So, all right, I know you have a few more items.
Well, so I have one more point I want to make, and I think you have a couple questions for me. So the way it was described to me, even with all of this, the Big Ten is still kind of in wait and see mode.
Sure.
So they have Fox telling them, yes, we want these. They have FSU, Clemson saying, yes, we're interested, but we want to see if we have an SEC move. You have the Big Ten presidents who are like, why can't we just wait until 2030 kind of thing. So they are kind of just in pause, wait and see move, and they're willing to let the SEC make the first move. And here's why. Some people might say that's crazy, but there's a couple reasons why. One, the schools they want, FSU and Clemson. The Big Ten believes that there are a lot of interest groups in both of those fan bases and in the boosters and whatever who may just prefer to go to the SEC. Right. And if that's the way it's going to be, then that's the way it's going to be. They don't want to get into a fight over it. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is they also just don't want to get into a fight with the SEC in general because they are really looking towards this scheduling agreement.
Okay.
One of the big parts of the scheduling agreement was to either both conferences would go to 8 games or 9 games. Well, the SEC was the one who was willing to make that change, and they're going to 9 games. So the Big Ten feels like, they took a step towards, like, we're working on this together. The SEC was willing to reach out to us on this, so we don't want to go in and invade their territory and then get into a pissing contest because we feel the most important thing is this scheduling agreement moving forward.
Okay.
So the Big Ten is willing to wait on that. Now, whether people think that's smart or not smart, I don't know. But here's the interesting thing is my contact, and he's been saying this for a while, but he's checked with other athletic departments around the Big Ten. They still believe that the SEC and the Big Ten are targeting different programs. Yeah. Again, Florida State and Clemson, they have a lot of value, as we've talked about with TV markets, eyeballs, all that stuff. But it sounds like both the Big Ten and the SEC are looking for different things in different programs and may have completely different targets. So the Big Ten's like, okay, let's let them take who they want, basically get the first couple that they want, and then we can come in and we're not creating a bad environment. We're not creating a fight. And really, they might not want the schools that we want anyways. Right. So that's kind of where we're at. And we're in a little bit of I don't know, not a stalemate, but kind of a pause in things. And I really think it may be a pause until the SEC makes a move.
Yes. Right. Well, that's what we said the last few times. I was different than you two episodes ago, and then I came with you that the SEC is going to make the first move. We don't know exactly when that is. But let's get into the SEC a little bit more here. I want to hear, so we haven't talked too much about UNC. I mean, we feel UNC is absolutely the number one target for the SEC. We dropped a big episode back the end of January where you were talking about kind of the Belichick factor is right around that Carolina Blue matter when we knew at the time and still know that UNC has been looking for years, looking at what's the next step for us. And we absolutely believe that's the SEC. And it goes into what you just said here, that really they're probably targeting different programs, whether it was made that way or it's just, hey, it's working out pretty good for us, minus maybe one school here. So let's talk about that. I mean, if you have Clemson, if you have FSU, if you have Miami, kind of the target, and I get Miami, you're saying, down a little bit further on the Big Ten side. And really, they're only looking to maybe add 1 or 2 anyway. And Miami's contingent to FSU. Well, let's just assume for the moment that the SEC is not going to go after FSU. I'm not saying that's the case. That's an assumption I'm making right now. So then, if the SEC is going to go after UNC as their number one, we've talked before about NC State. Is there that connection, that state connection where they're going to have to take them both? We've seen some items come up here relatively recently where it looks like we're starting to see a little bit of disconnection between those two. Very small. I'm not saying that is happening, but definitely some bills and things that are being presented where it certainly looks like the politicians understand that a separation could happen, not will, but could, and they're trying to make sure maybe they're prepared for that. So let's push NC State off to the side for a minute because we think the only way they get one is in the coattails to UNC. So let's just assume there are no coattails. They don't have that option. A couple schools I want to bring up. Duke. We've talked about Duke. You were a little bit higher on Duke when we had that fun episode where we kind of ranked. They're, I've heard, starting to rise up a little bit more for the SEC. A little bit more interest here as being, near the top, not UNC top, but, kind of rising up towards the surface for the SEC. And of course, UVA. That's a school, you've talked about that. UNC UVA being that kind of 1-2 punch that the SEC has always wanted. You don't get a lot of talk for UVA. They're kind of there. They're not spectacular. They're just good institution, don't get me wrong, but athletically, just kind of, they do okay. But I guess I'm kind of maybe top three being you, and it gets back to your point of they don't have the same targets.
Yeah.
If the top three, if UNC, UVA, and Duke, you're talking Clemson, FSU. I mean, that could be kind of where you're seeing it just kind of is working out. Do you have any information on Duke or even UVA at this point?
So I want to separate my answer into two parts.
Okay.
One, I'll say what I'm hearing or not hearing.
Okay.
And then the part two will be my speculation.
Okay.
Okay. So from what I'm hearing or not hearing is the only thing that I'm hearing regarding those schools is the continuous drumbeat of UNC, UNC. The Big Ten, all the presidents and the ADs, they feel that UNC is the number one target of the SEC. Okay. But let's talk about why, because then maybe we can use that reason to speculate on other things.
Okay.
So a reason why is they do want to they want to expand into the state of North Carolina. We've talked about that before. Maybe Virginia too, but definitely in the state of North Carolina.
Okay.
They don't necessarily feel like they need to add more eyeballs to football. Okay. All of their games, even like their Mississippi State games, get great. Like they feel like if you're in the SEC, you're going to draw eyeballs.
Right.
So that is not as important to them as the Big Ten, who they have a different need that they're trying to fill. So they're looking more, the SEC is looking at brands and a little bit, people say, the geography doesn't matter anymore. It does matter to the SEC. They love their footprint of the southeastern part of the country. They want to get into North Carolina, and UNC is a massive brand, brings the basketball eyeballs and all that stuff. The SEC did fantastic. You famously on Twitter had a meltdown about how many schools the SEC got into the tournament. Yeah. We can see the SEC, whether you like it or not, they have flipped a switch as far as their investment in basketball.
Yes.
They feel like that's an area where they can increase revenue, especially as we move into this new era of college sports. And obviously football is always going to be the cash cow, but they feel like any teams if you're playing in the SEC, you're going to get ratings, you're going to bring money. So that is why UNC is their main target. And that's what I've heard.
Okay.
I really have not heard, because my contact is it's a Big Ten source.
Right.
So they're very limited on what they know about SEC and what they're hearing. But for speculation, if you get UNC, Duke makes a lot of sense for a lot of the same reasons. If you get UNC and Duke, you're really locking down the state of North Carolina. Two national brands as well. Basketball. I mean, they just bring everything that the SEC is supposedly looking for. And I think honestly, if they end up having to, because they could take 3 or 4 teams, if they ended up with, and I think I said in my fun little thing, they would take UNC, NC State, Duke, and someone else.
Right.
But if they can get that separation from NC State, they probably would just rather take UNC and Duke. Again, that's speculation on my part. But I just think that they're looking for different things. So I have not heard Duke mentioned. Really, other than just as a hey, maybe they get thrown in with UNC because the UNC and Duke would want to stay together. But I think it makes a lot of sense from what they're looking for.
Yes.
In adding the brand value, getting into the state of North Carolina, and continuing to increase their basketball presence.
100%. And I did say on X, you can about Commissioner Sankey. So you can love him, you can hate him, but you sure as heck aren't going to ignore him because, if you're an SEC fan or you're in that conference, man, I don't know if the fans love him or not. I'm sure they have different opinions on the guy because he is the commissioner. But man, I mean, he is doing a bang-up job for his conference. Like, he's not here for the National Collegiate NCAA. He's here for the SEC.
Yes.
And, people call him a snake and and I'm not going to judge that. But again, I mean, he saw where there was an opportunity In basketball, he directed his ADs and his universities. Hey, I'm seeing an opportunity that's increase, our expenses here. Let's see what we got. And I still hate the fact that they got 14 in.
Yeah.
But hey, they got 14 in and a national champion, right?
Yep.
So I
Two
mean,
in the Final
he
Four.
saw it, and like I said, you can love him, you can hate him, but you can't ignore him or his conference.
And
I think he's doing a really good job from the business side of things.
I totally agree. And imagine how many they're going to get in if they add a UNC in
Yeah.
there. 16 a year.
You're gonna make me mad. Let's
Yes.
keep moving on now.
So I do have one more point because
Okay.
you asked about Virginia.
Yes.
So I think there is some, and again, this is just speculation. I think there is some smaller desire to get into the state of Virginia, but it's not as important as North Carolina.
Okay.
And the problem with the state of Virginia, there's not a brand like UNC. There's
Yep.
not a brand like Duke. UVA, I think, had potential, but they really haven't done what they would need to do. So UVA, if you look at their academic or their athletic department, it looks a lot more like Stanford's than it does anything. They have a lot of programs,
Yep.
and honestly, they care about soccer and lacrosse more than they do about football. So honestly, I think UVA probably has missed the boat on getting an SEC invite. Maybe they could get a Big Ten invite. I doubt that as well.
Okay.
And honestly, my speculation on UVA is that they're just going to stay in the ACC, which I think will survive.
Sure.
I think Notre Dame, they fit right in with that type of school that Notre Dame likes.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, with what you said earlier about Notre Dame, UVA seems to fit that bill.
Yep.
UVA, Miami. I mean, it just seems right where they want to be. So I wanted to make sure we talked about Duke. That was a little bit that I got, not to the source level that you have. I have nothing else. Do you have any other expansion news before we wrap it up?
So there's two schools I want to talk about.
Oh, two schools. Okay.
Yes. The first one I'm going to Kansas was brought up to me, and it was brought up to me in a weird kind of way, as far as kind of mysterious.
Ooh.
And what I was told is, don't sleep on Kansas. And I was told if there's one school in the country that has a Power 2 path that nobody is talking about,
Wow.
it's Kansas.
Wow.
They are an AAU member. They're with the geography and the cities that are there, whatever. Apparently, there's things about Kansas that I do not yet have a full understanding. But I was told, do not sleep on Kansas. If there is one school out there that has a Power 2 path that nobody's talking about, and that's Kansas. So I'm just going to leave it as that. That's what I was told. I don't even have any speculation on it at this point because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Okay. All right. They come up occasionally, but not to that level that I have not heard.
I think the Big Ten maybe considered them way back when they were looking at like Maryland and Rutgers and all of that.
Yep.
But I really haven't heard them come up with as far as the Big Ten since then. But apparently, we're not supposed to sleep on Kansas.
All right. I won't sleep on the Jayhawks. Okay. And who's your other one?
Jayhawks, and I'll remind you, Jayhawks are pretty good in basketball.
They are pretty good at basketball.
And if you look at the SEC footprint, you have Missouri.
Yep.
Kansas is not too far from
That's
there.
true.
So, anyways.
Okay.
Okay, my other school I want to bring up is Louisville. Louisville. Apparently, they are getting a lot of attention from multiple angles.
Okay.
Maybe not Power 2, P2, Big Ten SEC, but they're getting a lot of love from other conferences, and also from the ACC showing them love, wanting to keep them because apparently the ACC is afraid they could be a target. So the ADs talk to each other, Big Ten presidents talk to each other. The Penn State University president. Most recent job was the president at Louisville, and so I'll just say, the presidents talk, ADs talk, and apparently Louisville is getting a lot of love, and there could be some interesting goings on with Louisville over the next year as dominoes start to move. You may see them as a big name in realignment.
Okay. They always seem like if they're going to move, they seem like a Big 12 type of deal.
Could be.
But we'll see. All right. Well, man, we hit the gamut here. I think we talked about more schools in this episode than we have ever talked about in a realignment episode. And my goodness, Steve, you really went for it here. Probably could have split this guy up in two, but why do that when we can go for it all in one?
Yeah.
So, hey, appreciate all your info. So, hey, we got live episodes on Wednesday nights. If you are interested in asking Steve some questions about what he just talked about here on this episode, we will be live Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern. I would love to have you join us. We have a lot of good time. We usually have a good Q&A, good interaction with our viewers, so we'd happy to do that again. We're going to follow the House settlement, any congressional action that may be upcoming in the next few weeks here with the NCAA. And then we have a special guest coming on. We'll drop the episode Thursday, Sam Herder. He is an FCS guru, and we're going to ask him all kinds of questions about FCS and where he thinks maybe some schools may end up on the western side of realignment. So, hey, we appreciate you guys for watching. Make sure you like this episode and subscribe if you like our content. We'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.